Today I'm going to convert the Tyranid Neurotyrant into a floating Neurotyrant, and it's coming right up. Nick speaking, and welcome to this video. Right, continuing on with my Leviathan Tyranid conversions, we are converting the Neurotyrant. I've already converted the Screamer Killer, the Psychophage and the Tyranid Prime, but today we're doing something very different because I'm going to make this guy float. The Neurotyrant model, which of course is a single posed push fit miniature, is very difficult to change. It's quite fixed in its position with some very big pieces. But after converting one of my Necron Doomstalkers to a floating Doomstalker, I thought this technique would work really well with this miniature. First, of course, we had to cut the pieces off of the sprue and clean up the mould lines. Okay, so when that was done, I got to the original model and had a look at it. Of course, this model is attached to terrain at the bottom, so I'm going to have to remove that. And then I had to think about how I was going to make him float. First of all, I got a stem from a flying base, but that wasn't tall enough for this particular conversion. And then I remembered with my Doomstalker, I used some brass rods. So I got those out, but they were way too thick. They were 3mm, and of course the Doomstalker is a much bigger miniature to this. So in the end I actually had to order another rod. So I ordered a 2mm rod, and it was 50mm long, which turned out to be the perfect length. So the first thing to do, of course, is to remove the joining sections where the tentacles attach to the terrain. So I just cut those off with my clippers and then reshaped them with my knife. I then had a closer look at the body section where the rod is going to go, and the tail is actually in the way of the rod. So I'm thinking I'm going to have to cut the tail, maybe rotate it out of the way to make room for the rod. However, before we do that, I want to get the brass rod glued into the base. Now I'm going to drill a hole into the base so that I can bend the brass rod and then super glue it and put some green stuff on it underneath the base to make it really strong. So I'm going to get my pliers and I'm just going to hold on to the end of the rod and then bend the rod around. Now this isn't too difficult, but just do it very carefully because you want the top of the rod to be straight. You don't want to bend that straight bit. Once that was done, I just drilled out a hole in the middle of the base. Now you can see I've got some green stuff there. That's because I filled in the little divots with some green stuff on all of the bases before I did this conversion. Next I made up some green stuff and I just put it underneath the base, and then I put the brass rod into position. I used some super glue for this as well so that I could push it into place and make this join really secure. Obviously I'm going to have to let it fully dry before I do any work with this base, but that's not a problem because I've got quite a bit of work to do on the rest of the miniature. Okay, so I worked out where I wanted the rod to be on the body. Now the tail is definitely going to be in the way, so I'm going to need to cut it. It works out though that the tail is going to be cut at the bottom, so once I've rotated it and re-glued it back on, if you can see a join, it's going to be really difficult to actually see it. However, I'm pretty confident that I can glue it back on and just reshape it without you being able to see the join, certainly once it's painted. So I got my paint pot with the blue tack on, and then I worked out where I was going to cut it, and I gently cut the tail off. I then got my knife and I made a little hole where I'm going to drill for the rod to go into, and I just gently rotated that knife so I got a little starting point for the drill. I then used a 2mm drill piece and gently drilled out the hole. I didn't go too deep with this because I thought that's okay, I can drill out the hole a bit deeper later in the conversion, and I was planning on just gluing it all together. And then I realised that once it's glued together it's going to be really difficult to drill the hole out, so I went back to the miniature and I continued to drill the hole. However, it went a bit wrong here because I accidentally drilled out of the side of the miniature, so I made a hole on the outside. I had a look at the hole and I was pretty confident that I could just green stuff it in. There isn't that much detail, certainly nothing too difficult to green stuff. I then got the brass rod, which was now totally dry on the base, and I worked out the height of the miniature. So I got the original miniature and just tested the height. I wanted it to be roughly the same height. I felt the miniature was slightly too tall, so I cut a little bit of the brass pole off using my metal clippers. I then totally built the miniature, so we've got two miniatures now. We've got no terrain on the bottom. When he goes on that pole, he looks like he's floating. However, the miniature still looks the same. So I wanted to make a few little changes, and I thought the easiest way to do this is to change the direction, maybe swap the tentacles around. The two outside tentacles are the ones I'm going to target. So I got my paint pots with the blue tack on to help soften the cut, and then I gently cut into the tentacles. Once they were cut, I had a look. Rather than rotating the tentacles position, I actually swapped them from one side to the other. I used plastic glue to glue the tentacles on, and also at this stage I glued the towel into position, and I let that fully dry before I touched it again. Once it was dry, I then filed the joint down so that both sides of the plastic were matched, and that joint just disappeared. And then all I had to do was glue him to the brass rod and fill the hole in with some green stuff. And there he is, all finished. I'm really happy how he looks. He looks very, very cool, floating in the air. Of course, I'm going to paint the brass rods. That will be painted black. And as requested, here is a side-by-side view of the original miniature and my converted one. I really hope you like what I did with this miniature. Let me know in the comments box below. If you want to see my other Tyranid conversions, here's the playlist for you to check out. And here's a playlist with my Necron conversions from the Indomitus box set.